whereas the 200 pages are now missing. And Israel became a state around this time here, 1947 and 1948. This is my thing. Don't believe the hype. Don't believe the misunderstanding that some Hebrews have that we didn't draw pictures. We did draw pictures of ourselves, but a lot of people are saying that, you know what, it's an abomination to have pictures in your houses of yourself, and I hear a whole lot of crazy stuff here. But our people did keep records. And identifying who the king was, and drawing and painting, our people did do those things. Our people were master masons, so it's going to be very hard for me to believe that our people did not draw pictures of the kings and the queens and all the pottery that they have, the papyrus leaves that they were writing on, that they did not draw pictures. They had pictures of animals, but for you to share with me that they didn't have pictures of themselves, it's just ridiculous. It is simply ridiculous. Now, also too now is that what is happening in 1947, 1948, we had the Beaufort Declaration. This is when the whole process started, when the Israel became a state. And we can get into the Beaufort Declaration a little bit later. That happened in 1914 with World War II and everything like that. But it's very important for us to understand how these Jewish people became a state, a so-called state, and that they are not the original inhabitants of the land. The next question is, who are the Masoretes? And the Masoretic text versus the Hebrew. If we can go to the book of Yirmiyahu, let's go with Yekezikiel. If you can do Jeremiah, the 8th chapter, 7 through 8. Jeremiah, the 8th chapter, verses 7 through 8. Because we're about to go into some stuff here. And make sure that everybody's understanding this Masoretic text here. So who are the Masoretes? Jeremiah, the 8th chapter, verses 7 through 8, please.
Yea, the stork in the heaven knoweth her appointed times. And the turtle and the crane and the swallow observe the time of their coming, but my people know not the judgment of Yahuah.
Yeah, that's very important. Yes, the stork and the shamayim knoweth her appointed times. And the turtle and the crane and the swallow observe the time of their coming. Because right now we're about to see the change of the season. So we notice that the birds are now beginning to fly in a certain direction because in certain areas it's going to be cold. So everything is observing the times and the seasons, but not our people. There is so much hell that surrounds us today, and people are still walking around as if nothing's wrong. You see what's going on in the so-called White House. We are on the brink of something very, very big that's about to happen. This is not a prophecy. I'm not telling nobody to bank on it or anything like that. So everybody, keep your day jobs, all right? But usually what happens when there's a lot of attention being placed upon one particular area, especially with Donald Trump, this guy here, they're going to draw the attention away from him. Don't be surprised, all right, if you see or you hear that we're now in the war. Okay, because something needs to be deterred from him. Because a lot of times what happens is that when something serious is happening, society usually takes our eyes off the main focus into something else. Where smoke screen, exactly. There might be a false flag, but it's easy to kind of seduce our people. You know what, let's throw out a Nicki Minaj record and let's show how many records she's selling. And then people get all involved in that crap here. But something major is about to happen. And the reason why I believe something major is about to happen because we're about to move into a very important month, which is the 7th month. And the 7th month is the blowing of the shofar. The blowing of the shofar now is the coming of the Mashiyach. So ever since I've been in the walk, every 7th month, there was always, put it this way, the labor pains always increased. Always increased. And that scripture tells us, whenever they say peace, 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 there should be sudden destruction or war. So just keep your eyes on what's going on there. All right. So everything understands your appointed times, but the children of Yashra'al, we seem to like fall asleep and don't understand exactly what's going on here today. So verse 8.
How do you say we are wise,
Mm-hmm.
and the law of Yahuah is with us?
Mm-hmm.
Lo, certainly in vain made he it. The pen of the scribes is in vain.
Right. The pen of the scribes is in vain. Okay, let's read this in Hebrew a little bit, a little better translation. And the false pen of the scribes worketh falsehood. All right, again, the false pen of the scribes worketh for falsehood. So we're going to kind of look at some of this stuff that's going on in the Masoretic text that's just not really making sense. It is not in the original Greek. If we can go to the book of Romans, the 2nd chapter, verse 17, if we can get Solomon, please, if you can read that for us. Romans, the 2nd chapter. The 2nd chapter, 17. (17) 29.
Behold, thou art called a Jew, and retest in the law, and make thy boast of the Lord.
And that's what they do. Okay, so there are those, and especially with these Pharisees here. Behold, thou art called a Yahudim, and restest in the law, and makest thy boast of Elohim. Read on.
And knowest his will, and approvest the things that are more excellent, being instructed out of the law.
Okay.
And art confident that thou thyself art the guide of the blind, the light of them which are in darkness, an instructor of the foolish, a teacher of babes, which has the form of knowledge and the truth in the law. Thou therefore which teachest another, teachest thou not thyself?
Read that again, brother, please, please. Verse 21.
Thou therefore which teachest another, teachest not thyself.
This is a question.
Thou that preachest a man should not steal, dost thou steal? Thou that sayest a man should not commit adultery, dost thou commit adultery? Thou that abhorrest idols, dost thou not commit sacrilege?
Right.
Thou that makest thy boast of the law, thou breaking the law dishonorest thou Elohim. For the name of Elohim is blasphemed among the Gentiles, through you as it is written.
So who's responsible for this? It says, for the name of Elohim is blasphemed among the Gentiles through you, as it is written. Read on.
For circumcision verily profited, that if that thou keep the law, but if thou a breaker of the law, thy circumcision is made uncircumcision. Therefore, if this uncircumcision keep the righteous of the law, shall not his uncircumcision be counted for circumcision?
Absolutely.
And shall not uncircumcision, which is by nature, if it fulfill the law, judgment, who by the letter and circumcision doth transgress the law? For he is not a Jew, for he is not a Yahuah, which is one outwardly, neither is that circumcision, which is outward in the flesh. But he is a Yahuah, which is one inwardly, and circumcision is that of the heart, in the spirit, and in the letter, whose praise is not of man, but of you.
Absolutely. So when we begin to look at this, when we begin to see a lot of brothers and sisters where they're all adorned in their Hebrew garbs, but what we're basically looking at is what is actually inside the person. Because not what goes in a person that defiles the person, but what comes out of them. So we want to make sure that everything is reflecting one another. The inner man is a reflection of the outer man. The two must work together. So if I speak righteousness, if I dress a certain type of way, I should also now be the same way. You know, again, the inner man should reflect the outer man. So it's not all about the garments and all these other things there. We want to make sure that the person is judging righteously according to Torah. Let's go to Psalms 147, 19 to 20. Solomon, if you could read that for me, please. And yeah, Psalms. And if we can get the older brother here to do Hosea 8 and 12. Yeah, 147, 19 and 20. And we're going to get Yahuah. All right, James. Is Yahuah? No, that's James. Yaakov. Excuse me, Yaakov. Yeah, that's John. Yeah, James is right. Exactly. Hosea 8 and 12. You would get 8 and 12, and you're going to get Psalms 147, 19 and 20.
He sheweth his word unto Jacob, his statutes and his judgments unto Israel. He hath not dealt so with any nation, and as for his judgments, they have not known of me. Praise ye thy holy name.
Hallelujah. So yes, we have Hosea 8 and 12.
I have written to him the great things of my law, but they were counted as a strange thing.
Absolutely. So that's what we don't want to do. We don't want to make sure that we do enough research, making sure that we have a complete understanding of what this whole thing is about. Now, let's get into some reading here. We're talking about the Masoretic text. Now, I'm going to do a little reading here. Whoever wants the notes, I'll gladly share it with you. Just give me your email address, and that'll be no problem. I used to believe that the Masoretic text was a perfect copy, okay, of the Old Testament. I used to believe that the Masoretic text was how things were preserved in the Hebrew scripture throughout the ages. However, I was wrong. The oldest copy of the Masoretic text only dates back to the 10th century, nearly 1,000 years after the time of Yahusha and Mashiyach. Let me say it again. The oldest copy of the Masoretic text only dates back to the 10th century, nearly 1,000 years after the time of the Mashiyach. So what were we using then, and when we didn't have, I didn't bring the Masoretic text. And these texts differ from the originals in many ways. The Masoretic text is named after the Masoretes, who were scribes and Torah scholars who worked in the Middle East between the 7th and 11th century. The text they received and the edits they provided ensured that the modern Yahudim text would manifest a notable, deep understanding of the original Hebrew scriptures. Historically, research reveals 5 significant ways in which the Masoretic text is different from the original Old Testament. 1. The Masoretes admitted that they received corrupt texts to begin with. They admit that. The Masoretic text is written with a radically different alphabet, okay, than the original Hebrew. The Masoretics added vowel points, which did not exist in the original writings. The Masoretic text excluded several books from the Old Testament scriptures. We're going to go through some of that. The Masoretic text includes changes to prophecy and doctrine. Okay, I have it broken down here, receiving the corrupt text. Many people believe that the ancient Hebrew text of Scripture was divinely preserved for many centuries and was ultimately now recorded in what we now call the Masoretic text. But what did the Masoretes themselves believe? Did they believe that they were perfectly preserving the ancient text? That's the question. Did they even think they had received a perfect text to begin with? This will be very important, Mishpachah, very important. Early rabbinical sources that I looked into from around 2000 CE, which is the Christian era, mention several passages in Scripture in which this conclusion is inevitable, that the ancient readings must have different from that of the present text. There's a guy by the name of Rabbi Simeon, spelled S-I-M-O-N, Ben Pazi. He's a 3rd century rabbi. He calls these readings emanations of scribes. He assumed that the scribes actually made these changes. This view was adopted by the later Midrash and the majority of the other Masoretics. In other words, the Masoretes themselves felt that they had received a partial corrupt text, and as we know, a stream cannot rise higher than its waters there. In addition to these intentional changes, the Hebrew scribes, there also appeared to be a number of accidental changes which they allowed to creep in the Hebrew text. For example, consider Psalms 145. When you go, let's go to Psalms 145. Watch what happens. I'm going to show you some of these problems here. Psalms 145. Everybody has in their Psalms where we have the Aleph Bet beginning with the Psalms. No? Maybe so?
Yes, so
Okay, you have it now. You notice that the noon is missing. They took the noon out. The noon is missing in Psalms 145. And we have the missing verse reading as, Yahuah is faithful in his words and set apart are all his ways. This missing verse can be found actually now in the Orthodox Study Bible, which relies on the Septuagint. But this version is absent from the King James Version, the New King James Version, the complete Jewish Bible, and every other translation is based on the Masoretic text. In this particular case, it's easy to demonstrate that the Masoretic text is an error, for it is obvious that Psalm 145 was originally written what they're calling now in an acoustic psalm. And a psalm is actually a song. But what are we to make of the thousands of other locations where the Masoretic text diverges from the Septuagint? If the Masoretic text could completely erase an entire verse from the Psalms, how many other passages in the Scripture have been edited? Now, there's a difference in the alphabet. We're just going to start with the Father's name. Okay, we're just going to start with the Father's name. And what we're calling the Paleo, Hebrew, or Brit. On the Phoenician writing, we have the Father's name spelled this way. We have the Yod, the Hey, Hu, Hey. So that's the Paleo. In the Aramaic, you have to spell, it looks this way. We have the Yod, Hey, and we have the Hu, Hey. All right, so we see now that there's a big difference between Paleo and the Aramaic. We're going to go into that a little bit deeper. Now, what's interesting about these writings here is that if Moses was here today, he could not understand or read Aramaic. Could not do it. The language that was used, or the writing that was used during that time, and even the pronunciation, we're going to get into that a little bit. But again, the Paleo, the Phoenician writing is the way that we actually wrote at that time. The Masoretic text is written with an alphabet which was borrowed from Assyria or Persia around the 6th and 7th century BC. And is almost 1,000 years newer than the former writing that Moses, David, and most of the Old Testament arguments. Now, another problem came about is with vowel points. They do vowel pointing with this Aramaic. And the ones that were responsible for the vowel pointing system, we can talk about that a little bit, was the Masoretics or the Masoretes. They were responsible for our vowel pointing system. For thousands of years, ancient Hebrew was only written with consonants. There were no vowels. When reading these texts, they had to supply all the vowels from memory, based on oral tradition. In Hebrew, just like modern languages, vowels can make a big difference. The change of a single vowel can radically change the meaning of a word. An example in English is the difference between these words right here. Consonants would be very important. For example, if I was to now there's no vowels there. There's no vowels between the S and the L. There's no vowels between the L and the P. But this is real easy. Real easy. I'm going to ask Shammai to, how would you pronounce that? Okay, this is the SLP. Okay, so you're adding vowels. What about slip or slap? Now, by adding a vowel, if you put a vowel here between the A and the P, but what if I now put a vowel here and made it swap? What I'm just trying to share here now is that when you begin to put vowels between consonants, it's going to change the word. So when we have now the Masoretes, now you was correct now, because you could have gone a whole lot of different ways with it. But what's happening now is that you're adding a vowel between the letters. You could have put, let's see, you could have put the vowel between the S and the L and the P and got another word. But it's going to be very important now when reading, keeping everything in context, that when you go from Hebrew to another language, you can change the whole context of the story. And that could be a major problem. Especially now if we were to all go back to Israel, and let's say that we found this real remote mountain or this cave, and let's say now, because before there was the writing, we had the pictograph, and let's say if you you saw this symbol on a wall. Anybody know what this Hebrew letter?
The mem.
Right, the mem is?
Chaos, mass, water.
Okay, water. All right? Now, you come to a wall, and you see that symbol there. What do you think the likelihood now, if you open that door, water is going to come out?
Oh, it's 100%.
See what I'm saying? So we have to be real careful with things because, again, this is the way that our ancient forefathers actually able to describe things, is through pictures. What if we did this? I'm not the best drawer in the world. Let's see, this is the head, the nose, the mouth, the eyes. Let's give this ears. That's my ancient Phoenician. Right. So if you saw that on the wall, and we understand in Hebrew, what symbol would that be?
Resh.
Resh, exactly. And so you would see in the modern Hebrew, we would see it, that's the Resh, and then we would see it in Aramaic. That's the Resh, and this means head. All right, so just to give you just a few things there to work with. So now, for thousands of years, ancient Hebrew was only written with consonants, no vowels. When reading these texts, they had to supply all the vowels from memory based on oral tradition. In Hebrew, just like modern languages, vowels can make a big difference. The change of a single vowel can radically change the meaning of a word. An example in English, we had talked about the word slap Or just do this right quick. I like this one here. We could have did an A, we could have did an I. So these vowels change the thing because slap and slip, there's a two totally different words there. So making sure that we put the right vowels in between those words is going to make a big difference. Okay, we're about to get into the nitty gritty, Mr. Carr. We're almost done to at the same time. I don't want to, 4 minutes, okay. The most extensive change of the Masoretic text brought to the Hebrew text was the addition of vowel points. In an attempt now to solidify all the time the correct reading of all the Hebrew scribes or scriptures, the Masoretes added a series of dots to the text. And we're going to talk about the dots a little bit, identifying which vowel to use in any given occasion. The Masoretes were the most extensive Jewish commentaries which that nation could ever boast. The system of pronunciation probably invented by them is a continual gloss on the law and the prophets. For example, and I think that's about all my notes because everything else pretty much gets kind of redundant. For example, Hebrews 1 and 6. I'm going to share with you the difference and some scriptures that are different. In Hebrews 1 and 6 it says, and again, when he bringeth in the first begotten into the world, he saith, and let all the angels or the messengers of Elohim worship him. Now watch this now. And in the Brit Greek Septuagint it says, rejoice you Shamahim with him, and let all the messengers of Elohim worship him. That's Deuteronomy 32:43. But in the KJV, the Masoretic text of Deuteronomy 32:43 says nothing about angels worshiping the Mashiyach. In Luke 4:18, the Mashiyach said he fulfilled the Old Testament prophecy to proclaim liberty to the captives and the recovery of the sight to the blind. That's in the book of Luke 4:18. And the author